Thank you, Leader Jeffries. Back in 2011, Nancy Pelosi said that then President Obama didn't need congressional approval to bomb Libya. Now House Democrats say President Trump needs that approval to bomb Iran. What's the difference?
Well, obviously, Libya and the circumstances connected to that were very different than the circumstance that we face in Iran right now. I mean, I don't even understand the genesis or basis of that question. Not suggesting that you're not asking it in good faith.
Libya went on for 7 months.
As I've indicated, first of all, I was not in Congress at the time. So we're dealing with what we're dealing with right now, which is a catastrophic, endless war, as Donald Trump has characterized it, without any justification that there was going to be a preeminent assault or attack on the United States of America. And certainly there's been nothing that has been presented to us privately to justify a preemptive strike of this nature that has triggered an all-out war in the Middle East.
That right there is why this story blew up. Not because Hakeem Jeffries landed some knockout answer. The opposite. He got asked a very clean, very obvious, very fair question, and instead of giving a clear principle, he instantly started dancing. And that's the problem. The issue here is not whether you personally love or hate military action against Iran. The issue is whether the people screaming about constitutional limits today were using that same standard when their side was in charge. Because if the rule changes every time the jersey changes, then it's not a rule, it's branding. And that's what makes this whole thing so revealing. Democrats are trying to argue that Trump needed congressional approval here, while many of the same political figures or institutions were perfectly comfortable giving Obama broad room to operate in Libya. Back then, the argument was all about national interest, limited engagement, executive authority, and the practical need for the president to move fast. Nancy Pelosi said Obama had the authority he needed. The Obama DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel argued prior congressional approval was not constitutionally required for the limited operations under consideration. Dick Durbin praised the move as prudent. Fast forward to now, and suddenly the language changes, the standard changes, the outrage changes. Funny how that works in Washington. If you're tired of politicians acting like nobody can pull receipts anymore, hit like, subscribe, and drop your take in the comments. Should war powers be a real principle, or just another partisan costume people throw on when it's convenient? Now, to be fair, this kind of hypocrisy is not a Democrat-only disease. Washington has a long history of pretending the Constitution says one thing when your party is out of power, and something very different when your party is in power. Republicans did their own version of this around Libya, and now a lot of them are backing Trump on Iran. So let's be honest about the larger sickness here. The real story is that DC treats war powers like a prop. But in this moment, Democrats are the ones getting caught with the clearest contradiction, because they're trying to sell the idea that they were blindsided, frozen out, and denied critical information. That's the emotional pitch. That's the narrative. The problem is, the paper trail does not really support it. Before you can claim you were left completely in the dark, people are going to ask a very simple question. Were you briefed or were you not? And that's where this next clip matters.
Interestingly, today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio had a briefing with the Gang of Eight on Capitol Hill. Tell my audience what the Gang of Eight is, quick reminder, and why you think this is important.
The Gang of Eight are the top leadership from the intel committees and top leadership in Congress. And if the Secretary of State is briefing the Gang of Eight ostensibly on Iran, to me that implies that there's some significant covert element to any operation that the president may be planning, or some new breathtaking intelligence that is so sensitive that only the senior leaders and intelligence leaders in Congress can have access to it. So, of course, we have this massive military buildup right now that is giving the president maximum optionality when it comes to overt military options against Iran. But there's clearly a lot going on that we're just not seeing, and that's a covert action track. I will tell you, it is standard operating procedure for a president to pursue all lines of effort when countering an adversary. Diplomatic, military, covert action. So this is in line with past precedent.
And there goes the nobody knew anything argument, because once the Gang of Eight enters the picture, we are no longer talking about total secrecy from Congress. We're talking about limited high-level notification to the people who are specifically there to receive highly sensitive intelligence. That's a huge difference. The Gang of Eight is not some random side room. It exists for exactly this kind of scenario where the stakes are high, the intelligence is sensitive, and the administration is not going to blast details to 535 members of Congress before an operation is underway. And let's be real here. When politicians say they were kept in the dark, sometimes what they really mean is they were not given the exact amount of process, deference, or political leverage they wanted. Those are not the same thing, because if senior Democratic leadership was getting briefed, then the argument shifts. It's no longer, we knew nothing. It becomes, we don't think that level of briefing was enough, or we don't like the legal justification, or we think Congress should have voted first. Those are different arguments. Stronger arguments, actually. But instead of making those arguments cleanly, too many Democrats reached for the more dramatic line that they had basically been cut out. That's the kind of overreach that falls apart the second somebody starts checking the timeline. And this is where it gets even worse for Jeffries specifically, because not only was there a briefing, he knew there was a briefing, and he told reporters so in advance.
And quickly, Gang of Eight briefing at 3 p.m. on Iran. What are your thoughts again on where this could be possibly leading with potential U.S. military action in Iran?
Congress needs to act and authorize military force before any military action is taken by Donald Trump and his administration. We'll make that point very clearly in the Gang of Eight briefing that's going to take place in about 30 minutes. I'm interested, and I'll listen to what members of his administration are going to say at this secure briefing. But I also plan to press them on the claim that Donald Trump himself made about the Iranian nuclear program and what the great urgency is right now that you've assembled an armada, potentially dragging America into another failed, foreign, forever war.
That clip is devastating because it strips away the performance. Jeffries is acknowledging the secure briefing in real time. He knows it's happening. He knows who's giving it. He knows the subject. He's preparing his line of attack before he even walks into the room. So later, when Democrats try to create the impression that they were somehow wandering in a fog with no visibility into what the administration was doing, people are naturally going to say, hold on, you were briefed. Maybe not in the form you preferred. Maybe not with the policy answer you wanted, but briefed? Yes. And here's the deeper political problem. This kind of messaging destroys credibility on the issue that actually matters most, whether America is being dragged into another long, ugly Middle East conflict. That is a serious concern, a legitimate concern, a concern millions of Americans share, including people who don't trust Iran and still don't want another forever war. But when Democrats wrap that concern inside sloppy, selective memory and process complaints that don't fully match the record, they weaken their own case. They turn a potentially powerful constitutional argument into just another tribal talking point. Because imagine how much stronger Jeffries would sound if he simply said this: yes, leadership was briefed, but briefing a handful of lawmakers is not the same as getting congressional authorization. And I believe the standard should apply no matter who the president is. That would be coherent. That would be defensible. That would actually put pressure on Republicans too. Instead, he gave the kind of answer politicians give when they know the archive is working against them. And that leads right into the legal fight that always shows up in these moments: the War Powers Act.
Your critics in Congress have said that they should have a role, they should be able to weigh in here, and there are going to be war powers resolutions votes in Congress later this week. Why not notify Congress ahead of this? And does Congress...
Well, we did. We notified Congress. I mean, we notified the Gang of Eight. We notified congressional leadership. There's no law that requires us to do that. The law says we have to notify them 48 hours after beginning hostilities. We've done that. I think the notification went today. But we did notify members of Congress in advance. But we can't notify 535 members of Congress. And, well, the Congress can vote on whatever they want, but there's no law that requires us to do that. And I want to say something because I see people on TV. Look, that's fine. If they want to take a war powers vote, they can do that. They've done that. They've done that a bunch of times. But there's no, people keep saying that there's no law that requires the president to have done anything with regards to this. To begin with, no presidential administration has ever accepted the War Powers Act as constitutional. Not Republican presidents, not Democratic presidents. That said, we have followed the notification at 48 hours. We're here today. I've done more Gang of Eight briefings than I got in the 4 years that Biden was president and I was a member of the Gang of Eight. All of that said, we've complied with the law 100%.
Now, Rubio is doing what administrations always do here: assert maximum executive flexibility, argue that notification requirements were met, and remind everyone that presidents of both parties have treated the war powers framework as, let's say, negotiable. That last part is the key, because this is where the conversation stops being about one strike, one briefing, or one press conference. This is about the bipartisan habit of expanding presidential war-making power when your side is in office and rediscovering congressional prerogatives when your side is out. That's why the Libya comparison hits so hard. In 2011, the legal theory from the Obama world was basically that the operation was limited enough, connected enough to national interests, and structured in a way that did not require prior congressional approval. Democrats were comfortable with that when Obama was making the call. Today, many of them want a much stricter standard for Trump. Okay, fine. People can evolve. People can rethink war powers after Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and everything else. But if that's what happened, then say that. Own it. Say, we were too permissive before, and we're not doing that again. That would at least sound like learning. What does not sound like learning is pretending the previous standard never existed. And politically, that's why this blew back on them. Voters can smell selective outrage. They may not know every statute. They may not have the war powers resolution memorized. But they know when someone sounds different depending on who holds the pen. They know when the outrage feels rehearsed. And they definitely know when a politician acts offended by a question that is obviously sitting right there in front of them. And the bigger tragedy is that this entire circus distracts from the stakes. Iran is not a game. Military escalation in the Middle East is not a game. Americans have every reason to be skeptical, exhausted, and wary of being pulled into another conflict with no clear end state. That skepticism is healthy, necessary even, but if leaders want the public to trust them when they raise those alarms, they have to stop treating constitutional language like campaign merch. So that's the real takeaway. This story is not just about Hakeem Jeffries getting caught flat-footed. It's about a political class that keeps changing the standard after the fact and then acts shocked when people notice. If you want congressional authorization to mean something, then make it mean something no matter who is president. If you think executive war powers have gone too far, say it when your party benefits too. And if you were briefed, don't pretend you were completely shut out just because the optics are better that way. That's what makes this moment so revealing. The contradiction is the story. The inconsistency is the story. And until politicians start applying the same principle to their own side, the public is going to keep seeing all of this for what it is. Not constitutional outrage, but partisan choreography. Let me know what you think. Should Congress have to authorize this kind of action every single time, no matter who's in office? Or is Washington always going to keep moving the goalposts depending on whose turn it is? Hit like, subscribe, and comment below, because this is exactly the kind of receipt-based politics that deserves to be called out.